and thank you for the invitation. For me personally and the European Commission to testify and to submit its opinion on issues that relate to the ethics of science and the role of ethics in what we call innovation, union, and sustainable development. Unfortunately, my presentation will not be as interesting as the previous ones, and it will be, I think, focused on more mundane things than more procedural and instrumental approaches to ethics rather than on philosophical or theoretical ones. I'm surprised, before I start, I would like to emphasize the fact that I'm surprised by the amount of questions the presentations raise. And if this continues in the same rhythm, my fear is that when I go back to Brussels and I submit all these questions to my boss, they're not going to send me again to any conference, because we are looking for answers rather than questions. We have plenty of questions already in our portfolio. So hopefully my presentation will be constructive enough and provide some aspects of what we are doing, how we are approaching ethics at the EU level. So first of all, what is the ethics review procedure? It's a mechanism that ensures that research proposals that arrive to our desk in the frame of the FP7 program comply with certain ethical and legal requirements. The aim of this mechanism is to, first of all, make sure that all research funded by the European Commission, by all member states, is ethically sound, complies with all these requirements, provides legal safeguards to both the researchers and the research participants, and meets all sorts of international requirements and public concerns. Who is organizing this procedure? It's the ethics review sector of the European Commission, who is competent and supposed to organize the meetings per se, to appoint the members of the panels, and to moderate the discussions. First of all, and secondly, to make sure that all requirements and recommendations coming out of the discussions and put in a report are followed by the researcher. So how does this procedure work? After the completion of the scientific evaluation, so when thousands of proposals arrive in Brussels by researchers at the universities all over the continent, pass through a scientific evaluation. If the proposals are pre-selected on the basis of the scientific merit and raise ethical issues, come to our desk. Not all of them. Actually, there is a filtering process, there is a screening process. Some of them go directly to the member states because the researcher needs to comply only with certain national requirements. Some of them come to us because of the peculiarity of the issues that they raise. Who is reviewing these proposals? For sure not us. As I said before, there are expert panels that undertake this responsibility. These panels are composed of people that have an expertise in science and ethics. We try to achieve geographical and gender balance as every EU institutional structure. And we also try to make sure that there are lay people participating in this procedure. So we emphasize the role of non-experts in this ethics review procedure. Usually panels consist of 6 people, 6 experts, and 1 chair. So what do these people examine, basically? Whether the researchers respect the FP7 ethical standards, the ethical standards of the framework program, of the 7th framework program that started in 2007 and is going to be complete in 2013. Secondly, whether the relevant EU legislation is taken into account in the design of the protocols and the design of the research itself. Whether the applicants are planning to seek the authorization, the permission of the local authorities. So, for example, if the research is going to involve animal experimentation, whether the researcher is planning to obtain the relevant authorization, whether the researcher is a medical type of research, so whether the researcher is going to obtain the informed consent of the research participants, and so on and so forth. So depending on the type of research, we look at whether the application dossier contains a reference to the fact that the researcher is going to meet his responsibilities. What happens after the review? The applicants are informed of the outcome of the review. Usually the review ends up in a report, an expert, and what we call ethics review report. And this report is sent to the applicant directly after the finalization of this process. And in this report, apart from certain requirements, so certain obligations that the applicant has to undertake when signing the contract, his contract with the Commission, there might be a mention that his or her research might be followed during the lifetime of the project. So apart from having an ethics, a pre-assessment of the ethical compliance of the project, and this is a pilot procedure, we try to follow, to monitor the actual performance of the research and the actual fulfillment of the ethical obligations that the experts have prescribed. So every year we review 400 proposals that raise research ethics issues. These proposals, and that's the interesting aspect, belong to all sorts of different fields. So we don't only look at the health research, any type of research that involves human intervention. We also look at social sciences and humanities, and surprisingly enough, also this type of fields raise ethical issues at the research level. And as I said before, there are two different procedures: the ex-ante filtering process, the ethics screening and review, and the ex-post one, the ethics audit. Now, what do we need this procedure? Wouldn't be equally sufficient for member states to undertake the responsibility and make sure that any research that takes place within their jurisdiction meets certain international and EU standards? No, this was decided by all member states that leaving it to the member states wouldn't be effective and efficient. So they thought of this, creating a process at the EU level in order to make sure that the EU law in this field is met, is followed. And apart from the traditional role of the Commission as a guardian of the treaties to make sure that EU law is followed, the Commission has a particular responsibility in the field of research because it's the main organizer, the main funder of research in Europe. So there is a political and legal responsibility attached to its role, and that is an extremely important feature in the whole process. And thirdly, the need to intervene at the EU level is because we would like to create what we call an equal playing field at the EU level for all researchers. So for any researcher that faces bureaucratic or procedural difficulties in trying to find out what are my ethical obligations in this field and how can I meet them at the national level, and since most of the national authorities seem to be not responsive to this type of queries, we thought that designing a process at the EU level might alleviate these difficulties and might create a uniform, predictable research environment. There are other reasons for trying to create this, behind the need to create this, to operate this process at the EU level. However, I would like to focus on the challenges. This process, as sound and linear as might be, faces a lot of challenges. First of all, because ethics traditionally are seen as an obstacle to research, as a red tape procedure, as something that, okay, I need to do, but I don't really think of it, I don't really feel like doing, I don't understand the need for doing it. So that's a traditional fear and hesitation and concern that we have to surpass, and we have to convince the researcher that this is part of your responsibilities. This will facilitate your research. Secondly, it's very difficult to differentiate, to draw a distinction, a borderline between scientific and ethics review. Because what the ethics reviewers are doing is review a scientific protocol, review a scientific research. So many researchers usually ask, I mean, someone has already done the job, someone has provided a verdict on the scientific merit of my proposal. Why do we need this ethics review since they look at the same type of material? And the question is reasonable and plausible, but what the ethics reviewers are doing is looking at the same exact documents, but from a different perspective. Thirdly, another challenge for the procedure is how do you, not enforce, but how can you make sure that research funded by the European Union that takes place outside the EU meets international and EU standards? And especially when it comes to EU standards. How can you sponsor research with EU money, with the money of EU citizens, in a place that EU standards are not met? Because they have different, higher, lower, call it whatever. So what we call the extraterritorial application of EU law is a big challenge for us. Lack of common definitions. I heard a lot about sustainable development and the variety of definitions that exist. Human intervention for us is a big challenge. How do you define human intervention? Is it a physical intervention? Is it something more to it? How do you define vulnerability? How do you define a risk in the frame of an ethics procedure? There are so many different notions and definitions. And when it comes to an expert panel to sit within and to decide within 60 minutes for the ethical soundness of a project, that is a great challenge. Another challenge, most of what we have, most of the instruments these panels and we as a commission have at our disposal to review, to evaluate proposals from an ethical point of view are mostly declarations and what we call soft law instruments. So we lack regulations and directives to make sure that all these principles and standards are followed and we can enforce them in an effective way. Another challenge, we gradually see the development of technologies like synthetic biology or nanotechnology that no legal environment has prescribed any instrument that would be able to follow, to trace down the potential effects and risks of these technologies. So in that sense, if we move beyond the traditional fields of science and we get into the robotics field or the nanotechnology field, there the law seems to be inadequate, seems to be quite old-fashioned to address these challenges. And that raises, of course, the traditional question about the law running behind technology and always try to create principles and procedures like the precautionary principle in order to make sure that what is called or baptized as technological development meets certain legal requirements. And lastly, I would like to focus, I'm not going to go all through these elements. I would like to focus on what we call the problem of EU language on ethics. It became clear in the previous presentation, and I think it doesn't need someone to say that. Ethics cannot be approached in a one-dimensional way or in one uniform manner. We have as different opinions on ethics as member states are and more than this. So trying to evaluate research, science, at the EU level from an ethical point of view is not easy because member states, scientific communities follow different standards and approach ethics in an extremely different way. So what actually the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies, an advisory body to President Barroso, tries to do is to pinpoint those elements and those debates of ethical significance that where the EU or the Commission needs to undertake action and try to either create a code of conduct or come up with a uniform set of principles.